Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. We're going to be looking at lesson 2 in our Q&A session here, and a really important first step in the design process where we're going to be looking at creating a base plan as well as our client interview. And they're both, I would say, equally important, and we certainly want to emphasize that as you develop your design skills, you really want to make sure that you're doing all you can to document your site as accurately as you can, as well as what your client's wishes are. And I know when I started out many years ago, we didn't do a client interview, and we certainly do now and have for many, many years. But in the beginning, it was more almost of an artistic venture on my part, rather than really dialing into what people specifically wanted. So I would highly recommend that you dial into your your client's needs, and the more information you can get from them, the better. And of course, for ourselves, my wife and myself, right now, we're almost the polar opposite of what we started, where we started, in that we're extremely inclusive with all our work, and it's our client's landscape. It's not ours. So we want to make sure that we're, matching our skills up with what they want, as much as possible, right? Sometimes, it's not realistic for certain things, but yeah. So what I should do here is I will share my screen, and we'll just take a quick peek at lesson number 2, and then we'll look at some examples. And I have an example I can show you as well. Where are we here? Yeah, my screen is not displaying properly. 1 second here. Find out why that is. All right, there we go. Great. Okay, so yeah, lesson number 2 is an important first step. So we're just going through this process with a new project ourselves, where we actually have our workflow sequence is a little bit different than what you're shown here in the course. We tend to do our client interview before we actually are employed to do the project. And what we end up doing is we have people fill in a Google document, which is our questionnaire, and then we have a short meeting with them on the phone just to make sure that we're a good fit for what they are trying to do with their landscape. And then if we move beyond that, we go visit them on their site, take a look at what they're trying to do, and then provide a proposal for them. So this is our sequence is similar but different, but we really want to dive in early and find out some of those details before we commit to the job, and before we're pricing it. So jumping ahead a little bit, but the client survey, I would say, is equally important as the base map. And if you look at the grading here, there's 10 points for each, so it is reflective in that. But the base plan is what we should start with, and there are some good examples of the base plan within your template file. And with a lot of the slides that are here, there's often example slides to the right of them. And it just gives you a little bit of an idea of, not necessarily how your base plan should look, but it does give you an idea of some of the components we're looking for. And the graphical end of it can be quite tricky with the tools that we're working with here. But, everybody does a remarkably good job considering we're using some of these Google document tools. So this is a great example here of what we're trying to do. We want a rough property boundary, and often that is in red. And I see we've got a question here. I'll keep my eye on the chat. Go ahead, Alberto.
Yeah, my question was, do you yourself use Google Earth, or do you use like S3 ArcGIS or one of the open source equivalents of that?
Yeah, we use a couple of things. Our main design software is Vectorworks Landmark, and that is, I'll show you an example of it a little bit later today. We use Google Earth for some things, not for any design work really, but if we do use QGIS and a software called Cloud Compare, where we're taking LiDAR data off of downloadable sites. Like we can access free LiDAR data from where I live, and pretty much, I would think pretty much the west coast of North America. And that gives us a lot of information that we take into the design. It's not always the case. Like the one we're starting right now, we had a drone survey done. So they've done all the surveying, and they provide us with 1-foot contours and high resolution images. But yeah, so to answer your question in a roundabout way, we use a lot of different softwares, but the main one is Vectorworks Landmark. And fortunately, I started learning that software basically 25 years ago or more. So I've gotten fluent with it. It takes quite a while to learn, and there are other really good softwares out there. For most of, I'll just show you what I recommend for most people. Depends on your skill levels, but if you have an iPad, Morpheo Trace is a fantastic first step. This is a really low cost software. It's about $30 a year. And it does quite a bit. It's not an apples to apples comparison with something like Vectorworks, but it is quite remarkable. And if I was starting out, for anybody starting out that wants to keep their overhead low, which I think is super important, this is a good first step, just learning this and being able to provide, fairly good graphics on a scaled drawing. It's got a lot of shortfalls, but for starting up, I think it's great. Because most people don't want to go through a huge learning curve or spend a lot of money. I know, Vectorworks is probably, I'm not sure what the cost is these days, quite a bit, and you have to have quite a robust computer. So there's a lot of overhead involved with that. So I would start out as basic as you can and sort of work your way up as you learn more and want to do more. But
cool. Thanks
yeah,
for the
yeah, no problem. Yeah, there's lots of different softwares out there, and that just happens to be the one that we're hooked into. So with your base plan, there is a list here of what were some of the elements we're hoping to see. So we want to see, obviously, your project name or your site. We want your name on there, the location. Now, if you want to keep that private, that's completely fine. We just ask you to, if you want to just message me and send me the address, that's great. Because when we get into later portions of the program, in particular lesson 5, where we're looking at water and how it moves across your site, often I'll have to either go into most often Contour Creator and look at your site, add some contours, and just to help some people out with that, but not always. But it is nice to know where the site is, the date. That's an important bit to add. The software we use, we kind of have revision dates so that we know which ones are the most current. We want a north arrow and a compass. These are all sort of really self-explanatory, I think. A measurable scale bar, so a scale bar that has some meaning to it. All the structures, those roof lines and where they fall. The access to the site and pathways, and then these utilities, whether they're underground or overhead, and then contours. So that's a really important piece to this. And again, for work that we do, acreage work, we will often have a drone survey done. With a lot of urban projects where it just doesn't make sense to spend that kind of money, that's where we will try and find some LiDAR data that we can utilize, and we process that ourselves and can generate contour information with that. Now, the only trouble with that is the satellite, when that satellite image was taken and the resolution, but nonetheless, it's really, really helpful. And you'll find when we get, like I say, when we get to lesson number 5, you'll find that contour information is just a vital component within the design process. You really need it. I shouldn't say it that way. It's advantageous to have this information so you know how water's going to travel through the site, and you can find an awful lot about that even before you start. So you go ahead, Alberto. Don't worry if you hear a siren in the background. Our volunteer fire department.
So on the scale of almost everything I can find digital, my land is flat. It's very primarily flat across like 36 acres. So I can't really determine the contour lines, if there really are any significant ones. So what in that instance does that mean for me?
Yeah, no, with contour information, even if it's a small urban site, there's always some change in elevation. There's nothing flat, so to speak. So it often means you just need to get, did you say you're on 36 acres?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 1-foot contours might be what you need to look at. And there are some tools available. One of them that we use in the course here is called Contour Map Creator. Now, I would never use this for professional purposes. It's not great. Here, I'll just give you a quick. I live in Lanceville here. We'll just zoom in on yeah. So I would never use this for professional purposes, but for this class, it's great because it's accessible, and it's really for practice. It gives you an idea of what you have to do here. So there's a couple of different settings. So I traditionally will put it, even though I'm quite used to working in metric, I often do like 1-foot contours or having them in imperial units. And then we need to tell it the intervals. So we're going to go 1 foot here. So once we set that up, I just click where I want this bounding box. So within the box, I'm going to get contour information, and then we can change it afterwards. And then we just get data, and there we go. We have a legend on the right, and we have our contour information here. Now, this is not, again, you know, this is great for the class. It's just not something we'd want to use, again, for a design itself. It gives us a rough idea, but it's extracting information from Google Earth, which is inherently pretty inaccurate. So I would take it with a grain of salt, but again, it's great, easy to access information. So that's one place you can look. And so if you just punch in your address, that should pop up. And you'd probably be surprised with the amount of grade change you'd have on your site. And because I've never seen a flat site yet.
Okay.
So
I guess that
yeah,
answers my question.
that should help you out. So we got a question from Elsa. Do structures also include concrete patios? Well, that is a very good question. And I would say that, you know, structures are our house, outbuildings, garages, but we also definitely want to see any outdoor living spaces that are currently there. And even if they're just gravel, right? Or if they're concrete patio or a concrete walkway, yeah, we want to provide those. So really the base plan is a snapshot of your project site as is, right? In the condition it is. So the one thing that I would be careful of is occasionally we'll have a student who will have a property that perhaps doesn't have a structure on it. It's a raw piece of land, and they want to use this in the course, and that's great. And we often, well, I shouldn't say often, but in the past, we've designed landscapes for commercial projects where the building's not even been built yet. So we basically have to design with a proposed building footprint and a proposed access. So that's what you'd want to do if you don't have, if you have raw land. So just think about where you'd put a house and your access in, and use that. But these other elements, you'd certainly want to include. So contours, existing significant plants. So the trees and shrubs that are significant, you'd want to include those. And you don't have to identify them right now. Yeah, Dana, you got a question here?
Hi, I was wondering, so I have a site that is pretty small and it it's there is no structure on it. It's between it's a vacant lot. There used to be a house on it.
Yeah.
But now it's surrounded by on three of its sides it's surrounded by houses. And so the how I got that site was through Omaha Permaculture, which is a nonprofit that I'm working for. And I don't think that in like so for my client, which would be Omaha Permaculture, I don't think they have any plans on developing a building on that land.
Right.
And so is that okay for the design
Sure.
course or?
Yeah, so another option that we see is maybe this is your situation where you have a vacant piece of land, and some people will do this in a public park, and they're saying, well, maybe we're going to do a community building, a community garden, or something like that. There's obviously some goal, some use that you're hoping to see there. So in that case, there is often a need for, say, a covered structure, or even a tool shed, or what ends up happening is there's some sort of central area for human activity. So that's all the house really represents. That's where people spend most of their time, and they sort of radiate out from that. So in a public space, or in like with what you're discussing, is this going to be a food garden or a community garden? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we're planning on doing is making a food garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that sounds great. And you'll probably find there is, a need to have some sort of central gathering area. And that might just, it's hard to, I'm not sure what that would look like, but you would probably want to indicate on your base plan that, the intent is, this is a central area where people will gather, and maybe that's, again, a tool shed or a covered area. There would need to be something to draw people to the location, you know? So, yeah. So I'm sure you'll, if you don't already, I'm sure that will be something that becomes obvious.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That gave me some ideas.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see here. We're just talking about some elements here. So yeah, you'll see here we have some overhead utilities coming in. I believe that's what these are. They look like they're overhead because there's poles. On these larger sites, there's probably a well, right? And septic field. So those are important to indicate. And I think that's what's here, right here. Yeah, septic tank. Now, what we also want to know, if you can, it's great to know where the tank is, but we'd also want to know where the field is. That's really important, because we don't want to be developing anything permanent or deep rooted around your septic field. And that can be a little trickier to find out if you're not totally aware of that. Now, and where I live in British Columbia, often there'll be an as-built drawing that the septic installer will have done, so that there's a pretty clear idea of where the field is. And let's see what other things are important. You can indicate where the outside taps are on the house. This is mainly done because we don't get into irrigation in the course, and it would be hard to do so because it's pretty involved topic. So here we're looking at outdoor taps as a way of supplementing water for the landscape. Now, the reality is, if you had, the reality is you'd have a slightly different setup. You'd have what's called a main line, a pressurized main line for watering by hand, and probably some automated irrigation if you were sort of going down that road. But I don't want to muddy the waters, so we'll just sort of leave it the way it is. And in the future, it may be something you want to look at. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that right now, but it will probably come up to you, in lesson 5, when we're looking at water and maybe some collection of rainwater and distribution. So it's when we want to distribute that it then becomes a question of how we do that. And having a basic knowledge of that is really helpful. I I got plunged into a very large project early on in my career, and I had no knowledge of irrigation, and fortunately I had people around me that did, but it takes a few years to really build up that knowledge. So if you feel a little bit lost with it, not to worry, that will come. So I think we've covered most of the things here. And this property has an underground gas line. And yours might as well. That's another important thing to include if you know where it is. The other thing that can be helpful, and I'll just show you here. Oops. So in a lot of areas in North America, there's these interactive maps of of different districts or towns or cities. And let me see, these are ArcGIS maps. So these are really helpful for a couple of things. I think I clicked on the wrong link. I'll go to the RDN. It will be similar but different. All of these are basically the same. The information they give you can be quite different, and that's what we'll see in the layers section here. So you can see there's contours, but you can see the contours for the regional district of Nanaimo, where I live. They're 2 meter. They're, that's over 6 feet, so that's not great. But there are parcel property boundary information, and there can also be utility information. So you may see where the water and the sewer and stormwater come in and off of the property. So these interactive maps can be very, very helpful. There'll be some mapping that also has better contour information. There may it's possible you don't have much of that either. We have air photos. There's all kinds of, and these are better than the Google Earth images. So that's another resource you might want to check out is, again, this interactive maps in the areas that you're working. And they are very helpful. We use them quite a bit at the beginning of a design process. So let us go back to here. Let's see if I've missed anything. Of course, we want a legend, right? So if you're using symbols, like these symbols here, what is that all about? And we see on the right that one's a deciduous tree, one's a conifer, and then there's a symbol here for hedges or shrubs. So that's a good idea. In this case, the lawn is kind of a yellow, and then they have a large, looks like a wooded area that's right in here, and it goes this way. So that if you have a lot of trees on your site, instead of individually showing those in individual symbols, you can always do this sort of thing where you do the edge of the forest and then provide color for the rest of it. So here it's been labeled as a mixed forest. So that's a good way of showing this without it getting too busy, because the one thing we want to keep in mind is this is the base plan. We're going to be applying design layers on top of it. So we don't want this to be too busy, right? We don't want to have too much information going on here. And this is where it's handy to have a legend. So we don't have a lot of text within the drawing itself. And that really helps when we get to apply different layers to it, so we can still see the base plan without it distracting us. So I also like the fact that this person has put some adjacent properties, some homes here that can be really helpful. So this home's quite close to the property line, and as the design unfolds, it may be in this case that maybe there's a privacy issue in that direction. But again, these are really, really helpful to have. You don't have to do it. There's an indication of the water flow. You don't have to to put those if you don't want. I don't do that on the drawings we do. Actually, what I'll do, I'll just show you an example of one that we've done, and it'll be different. And now I can't find it. There we are. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. So this, I think it's a 6 or 7 acre property we did. It's probably hard to see what's going on with this. And zoom in a little bit. If it lets me. So we have contour information, and they are labeled, right? We zoom in, we can see that they're 1 foot contours. We have, in this case, we have indicated where much of the forest is. There's an existing pond. There is a driveway coming in and a house right here. A big paddock and a little barn. But you can see there's lots of grade change on this site and a property line. So our base plans going to look a little different than what you're being asked to provide. We don't supply, this isn't a deliverable to our clients. We don't provide them with a base plan. There's just, there's no call for it or reason, but this is going to be the foundational layer of all those design layers to come. And the first one that we're going to look at after our base plan will be our sector compass. And we do provide that, but we're not going to dive into that today. But again, this is just an example. And at the bottom, we've got, we label the drawing, and we have a scale here with a scale bar and north arrow. So, and we like to go north up. If that is possible, that is always a good thing to do with your base plan. If you're, it's easy when we're in a property like this that's square. As well, with our software, we can change the orientation of our sheet so it's landscape or portrait to accommodate unusual size lots. Whereas the course, we're kind of stuck with the format we have. So the nice thing is, whenever we display anything on a design sheet like this, we have some white space on either side, and often that's where our legends or notes can go, right? So you don't necessarily want to fill the whole sheet with your plan. You want to leave some space for notes, and for really depending on the design layer that you're actively working on. All right, well, we will head back. There we go. So yeah, property boundaries and easements. That's another important item. That's not not something that is applicable to where I live, but I have seen this quite a bit in other properties where, and it not necessarily just small urban lots, but also on acreages, there may be an easement to allow for access. It could be for hydro, for overhead hydro. It could be for septic, or sorry, not septic, but for sewer and water. So you definitely want to indicate where that is. It's amazing how much space the easements can occupy on certain lots. And sometimes people aren't even aware of it when they purchase the property. So yeah, Natalie, go ahead. I see you got a question.
What is an easement? I don't know what an easement is.
Yeah, well, what can happen is, let's say you have a building lot, and as they do a subdivision, they develop a subdivision, they may have to run utilities through a property to get access to another one. So there may be a space, and it may be 10, 15, 20 feet wide, where there's sewer pipes going in through, say, your project site. And that space is basically, you have to leave access for either the municipality or the county or whoever it is that has the easement. And so you just make sure you're not putting anything permanent there, but it does come up. And those interactive maps I showed you will often, they'll often indicate that when we zoom in, and if there is an easement layer here, we can take a look at that. But yeah, it's not on all sites by any means, but it could very well exist. And it is vital to know. The other thing that's not on here that I would keep in the back of your mind is zoning, what's allowable on that particular property. And you may find that your client's needs or what your clients want to do don't align with the zoning. But again, that's not important for our base plan. It's just important as we go along with regards to site design or site development. And an example would be fencing height or retaining wall heights. So we're working on a project right now that we're putting in retaining walls in the design, and we have to keep those under 4 foot in height in order to avoid a building permit and engineering. So knowing that is vital. If you go in and we have an option in our plan to go with a 5-foot wall, but our clients will then know that's going to require more cost and a different approach. Yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
What's what's the best way to get information besides the map about zoning and regulations and easements and that sort of stuff?
Sure, that's a good question. I'll just show you here an example. So it's, let's say, well, it depends where you're located. We have a file here that is sort of ongoing. It really is site specific. So here you go. I'll share that. Sorry, I just had to find. As we've been working over the years, we collect, we go on to, let's say we're working within the RDN, the Regional District of Nanaimo, which is kind of in and around where I live. If you go on their website, they will have bylaw information. So this is a 473-page PDF on all the bylaws in the RDN. So now the nice thing is it's a PDF, so it's searchable. So if I want to find out about retaining walls, it'll help me. So I get a definition here, and I get some more information right here. So it's telling me that I have to stay under a meter, and I can only retain a meter. of material unless, you know, I'm going to be doing a building permit, and that'll include having a structural engineer work with us. And we've done that lots of times, but it's, you know, it's you end up in a sort of different league in terms of the cost and just the hassles that, and some people don't want to bother with that. But in this particular case, our clients may want to go over this height. So yeah, so you just look for building bylaw information in your area, and it's often in this sort of a format. It's pretty boring, but everybody has them. So any city or area is going to have their bylaws. Most of them will be posted on their website here. So, okay. Some good comments here. Casey put in an interactive map here for Benton County. Excellent. Yeah, and even where I am, let's say we have this information online, and so we have a fairly good idea of where our utilities are, and we complete the design and we're starting work. Well, when we do that, we have a service here. It's called Call Before You Dig, and they will let us know where all the utilities are for that property, at least up to the property line. They used to come and mark out all of the gas lines and stuff. They don't do that anymore. But you know, when you go to execute a project and you're going to be in there with an excavator, you definitely want to know where stuff is. You don't want to find out the hard way. We hit a gas line once and it wasn't very fun. Nobody got hurt. There's no, it was totally our fault. We actually had the gas line marked out, but we were on that project for about 3 months and the line got erased just from traffic with the machinery. So yeah, we ended up hitting that. It wasn't a good marketing day for the company, having the fire department. And however, easy to avoid that. Got another question here from Melissa. Do we need to include both metric and imperial? No, you don't. And what I would strongly suggest is you pick one lane or the other. So if you're interested in imperial, I would go with that. If you like metric, I would go with that. I don't have a base plan to show you here right now. The one we're currently working on, the design we're currently working on, it's in metric. So I've stuck with that, and that's because the drone survey I received was all in metric, so I've just stuck with that. So all my contours have really funny labels, but I know that they are 1 foot. But it gets really complicated if you mix it. So if we have a scale that's in imperial and then some other metric units, I would avoid that. For myself, it'd be no problem because in Canada we're kind of juggling both, but a lot of people aren't really dialed into metric. So yeah, just trying to keep up with the chat here. Some great questions. How many feet do you use for contours? That's a good question, Andrea. It really depends on the site. So I like to try and, on a smaller site, I've had a site where I've done 6-inch contours. That was quite flat. A flat urban site went with 6-inch, and I was able to get that through LiDAR data quite easily. Most of the time it's a foot. If there is quite a bit of grade change, I might have to change that up That's one thing I like about LiDAR imagery is it gives me the ability to create whatever contours I want, provided it has a certain amount of resolution. So 1 foot is the most desirable, but I've seen acreage sites where you got to go with 5 foot. And you do want to, that's one thing I would suggest is whatever you choose, stick with that interval. I have seen people before that utilize, they'll be 2 foot, 2 foot, and then 5 foot. And so they'll mix it up a little bit. And it's a bit of an injustice in a sense, because when you get these contours, regardless if they're of the interval, you get a pattern that is developed. And that pattern is really, over time, is something that will help, will almost speak to you, right? You can see where the water patterns, where the water is flowing, where there's opportunity, maybe to capture or to create holding ponds. So yeah, it does depend on the site. Is 25 too big? Well, you know, I would say that if you have access to different intervals, just take a look at them and just see what feels right. If it's too much, where all you're seeing is your contour lines, then you know to back that off a little bit. But it might be 20. I've seen 20 foot. I've had students use 20 foot contours on large acreages, and that looked good. And then when we get to week 5, you might want to, you know, shift that a little bit for your site itself. It really depends on how much outside of your project site you're going to include. But yeah, 25 might be. It seems to me, Andrea, your site's about 40 or 60 acres, something like that. Okay, yeah, 80. There you go. That's a nice size. All right. Let's see here. Melissa had a question on the template. It lists both for temperature. I didn't know if I need to convert.
No, that was the same question. Sorry, just explaining about the metric imperial that on the charts for like precipitation and whatnot, it had both. And so I didn't know if I was just explaining that. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I mean, you could include both, but I would go with one or the other. And then kind of stay with that through the whole design rather than mixing, unless you can't find other info. But
Sure.
yeah, and if you started to use metric, you'd probably drop the other, because especially with rainwater harvesting, it's so easy. But we'll get to that when we get into lesson 5. Alberto has a question here. Is it inexpensive to get LiDAR at 6-inch? Yeah, well, it takes a little bit of training to do it yourself, but you could find a GIS technician in your area and they'd be able to do it. And it's not expensive. It'd probably be just a couple $100. Alternatively, you could get a drone survey, but then the cost would go up. And the LiDAR imagery is great. It all depends. The only downside of it, if there's satellite imagery taken and then there was changes made to the site afterwards, that's the only tricky part with that. So, all right. Now I think we have a couple of questions here on our Google Doc. So I'll have to get back to that. I haven't even touched on the client interview, but perhaps that is a little more self-explanatory. Maybe we should just touch on that briefly here. So again, the template file has all the questions, and it is a great format. And it's pretty basic. It's really dialing into, you know, a bit of an introduction, I don't have an example of ours to show you, but it has some similarities to this. So there's a site inventory. So we kind of want to know what's there already and what people are hoping to acquire. So that's in this area here. So what do they do with their water, their compost, you know, some pretty basic things. It's surprising how few clotheslines are used these days. That's a real low-hanging fruit to save energy. Some legal features, so that again, that's where an easement might be. You do see this in, I've seen it in larger properties in other provinces where there'll be, you could have 200 or 300 acres, and you might have a very small part of that provides water for other lots. So this is important. There may be a little nugget there that you want to dial into. And then, you know, things like what do clients like most about their site, and what do they like least about their site? And this seems really kind of rudimentary and maybe obvious, but very, very important. It's something our questionnaires, we will consistently go back and revisit them as we're going, just to make sure that we stay on course. And this, a little bit of a repetition. So what are the concerns? It could be water, it could be erosion, it could be lack of fertility. There may be all kinds of answers there. And then some of your goals. You know, what are your top goals on the site? And, you know, don't get too worried about, you know, going too deep with that. This will probably get changed in time. I think that question might be removed, but yeah, go ahead, Natalie. You got a question?
Or I'm designing my own property right now.
Mhm.
Should I do it like just like, I guess this is more of a question of like how I should word it. Should I write it like I'm interviewing a client, or just say what I myself want?
You could just say it with what
Okay.
you want. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Thank you.
important, yeah, the important piece is that if you're going to design for somebody else after the course, you want to continue designing, that you at least consider this as a really important first step, is finding out more about your clients, even their occupation. I mean, you know, and their hobbies. These may seem like, you know, why do I need to know that? But they can play into how they want to use their property, and you know, it's just important little nuggets of info. So yeah, I would just go ahead as if you're interviewing yourself. And this is an important one. A lot of people, what you'll probably find in time is you'll have people that do have a vision for their site. They want it to look, or they want it to feel a certain way. And then there'll be people that have no idea what they want. And that's the scary situation, is when you're working for somebody and they have no idea what they want. They're expecting you to provide that. And that's why we have these preliminary calls. If somebody says, oh, I just want it to look better, you know, that's not warm and fuzzy from our perspective. We want to have a little more, you know, that then you're just kind of a shotgun approach. So having some idea of what they want to achieve, whether that's, you know, food gardens or more resiliency, maybe they want some water sovereignty, right? Those are valuable bits of info to be aware of. And then a conclusion. So any relevant images. So this is one thing, when we start a design, we take hundreds of images and videos. If I had a drone, I'd probably fly and do a few drone videos. We often have drone surveys done, but we don't do those ourselves. In Canada here, you have to have pilot's license to fly a drone. It's completely backwards, but unless the drone is below a certain weight. So yeah, we have to farm that one out. But yeah, collecting data, and for me, I'm very visual, so I do well with these sites, with all the images. And then once you start, even starting the base plan, like the example I showed you of the base plan we did, that took a couple of site visits, and that was a tough base plan to make because there was so much going on there. And some are more easy than others. But once you've nailed it, then you can sort of go on. You don't, it's hard when you, because this happened to me earlier in my career, when you wouldn't put quite as much effort into your base plan, you want to get going with the designing, and then you realize you've missed something and you have to go back and make changes. So want to try and avoid that. There are some assignment resources here you can check out. So how to make a scale bar. Some people are going to prefer to do their mapping by hand, and I would encourage you to do that if you're more comfortable doing that, that's the way to go. Using an iPad and an iPencil, that's a really good low-cost way to go. You can use Google Earth. That's not, the most refined way of doing it, but there's two pieces to this course, and one is learning a permaculture design process, and the other is articulating your ideas graphically, and they're completely different. So you may nail one and have to really work on the other in time. I can't draw by hand very well, so if I was using that, I would be struggling. So do realize that this is kind of a there's multiple parts to this whole industry and process, and you never know it all. You'll always be learning more. I mean, I learn something new every week, and it's great. Love it. So here's a lot of resources at the bottom here. And you could spend a lot of time going through all this. You'll notice there's the contour map creator is at the bottom. There are other ways of getting contour data, but and the USGS topo maps here, that's very, very crude. That's probably 20-foot contours there. And I think most of Oregon has LiDAR imagery done to the whole state. So there's a lot of information out there. So yeah, you can take a look at the resources, and then of course you want to make sure you look at the rubric and include all the items that have been requested. This is what I use to grade your assignment. So if you've got everything included, you'll be acing it. Yeah, so let me just see, there was a question here. Andrea had a question. Created a map in Revit, okay, and you printed it and uploaded it into slides. Yeah, well, the one way to be sure of that is before printing is to have a little scale bar in there, and then you're safe. Just wonder if Andrea's on the call here. Yep, there you are. Okay. Does that make sense, Andrea? As far as the scale, having that scale bar inside?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And then yesterday I actually noticed the preview of the slides and the ruler at the top and the side of slides. I didn't notice that before.
Oh, yeah, I could not tell you. I'm sure it is there. You probably know slides better than I do.
No, I've actually never used Google Slides, so that's why I'm trying to integrate and try based on what I have. I use SketchUp and Revit, but I don't use color typically. I don't use color formatting, and so I'm trying to figure out my best process.
Well, if you feel like just sticking with black and white, that's great. I mean, it's whatever works for you. And I know a lot of I've had a few landscape architects and architects in the course, students, and the graphics are beautiful. Typically, and they're often doing all of this outside of Google Slides, and they'll just PDF it and or however they want to grab a screenshot and drop it into the slide. So yeah, whatever works for you. If you want to stay more black and white, I mean, that's great for a base plan, because as soon as you start overlaying it and you add a little color, things are going to pop out quite a bit. I know that we do add color into our base plans, but when we are designing, say, the water system, a water layer, we'll gray out the base plan, and then we'll have some color on that design layer. So that's one approach you can do. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question there, Andrea.
Yeah, that's that's
Cool.
good. And I thought it was required to have color. One of the videos I watched, one of the instructors required everything to have color.
Yeah.
So that's where I was getting that premise, but
Sure.
that's helpful. I might keep it more simple, and I'll still use color, but I think I'm going to do more color blocks.
Right. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing everybody's work, and we are getting at the end of our meeting here. Is there any other questions anybody has before we go? One thing I will throw out there is you'll probably see if you haven't already, a note being circulated. Javin Bernakovich, one of our instructors, he is putting on a couple of base plan workshops during the week. So if you're at all unsure of, or you want to learn a little bit more about base plan creation, it would be great to check out his Zoom meeting. And he's an excellent instructor and a good friend, and yeah, you will definitely gain some knowledge taking a look at that. If those have been very helpful. He does that every course. He usually does a couple of them, so I'm not sure if he has circulated those notes yet or not, but check it out if you are all in need of some help. And Natalie, can I talk for you a moment? Yeah, sure, no problem, Natalie. And Melissa. Okay, well, if both you want to hang on as I turn the recording off, we can do that. But yeah, thank you everybody for attending today's session, and really look forward to seeing your base plans next week. And yeah, this will be a great start to your design. So if anybody has any other questions, now's the time. If not, we will see you in a couple of weeks with our next Q&A session. So thanks very much again for being part of the class today.
So I just